Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report, powered by ENC.com. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. The taxi industry basically runs this country. We've all been reeling from the shocking story coming out of Soweto at Maponya Mall just a few days ago, where a couple of men approached an e-hailing driver, shot at him, killed him, set his car alight, and harmed two other people in the area. And since then, major taxi organizations have come out and condemned the incident. Specifically, Santaco has got a lot of press and a lot of criticism for the statement that they put out. But it all has rung a bit hollow given the long and storied history of rivals to the taxi industry, whether it be train lines or bus services, mysteriously having cables stolen or buses set alight, or My City buses in Cape Town not being able to use certain routes, or the taxi industry basically shutting down Cape Town by blocking one of its key roads. But on the other hand, the taxi industry is one of the most powerful and important and useful industries in South Africa. It is literally the way that millions and millions of South Africans can afford to get to places of work, to get to clinics, to get to shops, to go home, to go on holiday, to go to the homes of their parents in different provinces. It's a vital industry. So today we're going to talk about the taxi industry. The only place to watch the full show is on enc.com. The link is in the description if you're watching on YouTube. You can also go to the other link in the description, www.3beaniesnetwork.com, to get some awesome 3 Beanies Network merch. I'm wearing a different shirt today that's proven very popular. But the other thing I need to address before we get into the WhatsApp line and the big story about the taxi industry is we have finished building the studio for the 3 Beanies Network. It is in my house, which is great because I fell out of bed, 2 meters shower, another 1 meter onto set today. It is gorgeous. We got it professionally sound paneled and sound balanced. It is dead in here. No echo. It is outrageous. So, really terrible. Maponya Mall a few days ago in Soweto, 4 men approached a vehicle that had stopped at the entrance of the mall. It was an e-hailing vehicle. They shot at the driver and set his vehicle alight while he was still inside. Shots were also fired at a second vehicle nearby. That driver was wounded but managed to flee before his vehicle was set alight, and a passerby was also shot. So that driver was an e-hailing driver, and there's like really just heartbreaking revelations about this e-hailing driver. That e-hailing driver had only been in Johannesburg for a few weeks, had moved from another part of the country to try and build a better life working as an e-hailing driver, had only recently got the car, and according to his family, this job gave him hope of putting food on the table, but then he lost his life in a murder that police believe to be ongoing tensions between e-hailing drivers and taxi operators. And now his family is in KwaZulu-Natal, where he moved from, and the family is struggling to cover funeral costs. Just so you understand the extent to which this was this man's ticket to take his family from a position they could barely cover the costs of the funeral of someone in their family to a better life through e-hailing. And in response, the major taxi industry union, Santaco, released a statement that they have been lambasted for. I'm going to read it to you in full. It's not very long, thankfully. It's not an ANC statement. You don't need to set aside an hour of your day to read it. Santaco Gauteng condemns violence against e-hailing operators in Johannesburg. The South African National Taxi Council, Santaco, in Gauteng has noted with deep concern about a violent incident that occurred last night in which several e-hailing operators reportedly sustained injuries and tragically one person lost their life. We condemn these acts of violence in the strongest possible terms. Violence in any form has no place in our society. We extend our deepest condolences to the family and loved ones of the deceased, and we wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. We urge members of the public to avoid speculation and unfounded accusations that automatically place the taxi industry at fault. Such assumptions not only harm the reputation of the industry, but also undermine due process. We call on all to respect the work of law enforcement and allow the police to conduct thorough investigations into the matter. Santaco Gauteng remains committed to promoting peace, safety, and mutual respect for all road transport stakeholders. That rang so hollow because, sure, there are still investigations ongoing, but respectfully, why would 2 cars be shot at outside a mall where there have been disputes between e-hailing operators and taxi operators, documented disputes? Why would 2 cars randomly be fired upon with no attempt to steal anything from those cars, and then 1 car burnt afterwards? And you don't have to work very hard to find dangerous violence-threatening disagreements between taxi operators and e-hailing operators. This is a storied thing that has happened across the country. You will know full well that sometimes you call an Uber or Bolt to go to a certain place in different parts of the country, and they will say, hey, can I not drop you off there? It's dangerous. Or, hey, can you sit in the front to make it look like I'm not transporting you? And there's sometimes even danger between like old school actual taxis, like mini cabs, pushing back against e-hailing operators. And there's been a lot of mystery and questions about why e-hailers have struggled so hard to get legislation passed and to get processes and policies put forward through the government. But many politicians are involved with taxi operations. Many politicians, there's a long and storied history of taxi operators, taxi big companies funding political projects, supporting different politicians, supporting different parties. It makes sense that those politicians would be sensitive to and influenced by the lobbying power of traditional taxi operators. And it is all the more galling because on the day that this poor man was killed and his car was burnt, Santaco released another statement, 13 August 2025. Santaco raises grave concerns over ongoing illegality in the e-hailing sector and delayed regulatory reforms. So Santaco clearly sees e-hailing as a rival to their business. And what's so galling also is that Santaco just must have members, by pure probability, must have members who are involved in taxi organizations that actively try to sabotage rivals. So James is probably going to talk so much about this now, but like long distance buses being threatened by taxi bosses, official government funded and developed transport projects like the My City buses in Cape Town not being able to use certain routes and suffering threats of violence, Golden Arrow buses being threatened and sometimes burned in different parts of the country. And as much as copper cables are stolen by petty thieves sometimes, often when it's involved with train lines, it sabotages those train lines and takes train lines out of commission. Who benefits from train lines going out of commission? The taxi industry. The great threat to the taxi industry in terms of mass traffic is train lines being efficient and affordable and safer and often more reliable in terms of time traveled than the taxi industry. There is a long and storied history of the taxi industry being involved with criminal networks and involved with politicians. They have absolutely enormous power. But the taxi industry is unbelievably important and was the way that Black South Africans were able to get around, despite often having to break apartheid laws and get away from the police. It was the way that Black South Africans were able to get around during apartheid and has formed arguably the backbone of South African transport for the vast majority of people who need to commute every day or commute long distances. So it is really complicated. But James, help me with this. Are e-hailing operators rivals to the taxi industry?
I think particularly frustrating about this. So it's been categorically shown that there's just a different clientele. There's such a price difference that the actual comparison would probably better be a bus in terms of fares, in terms of how much money that they
buses versus taxis,
okay. Like comparable clientele. The reason why it's easier to go after an Uber driver is because it's an individual, rather than a bus, which is a company-associated thing or even a government-associated thing. So they can target these vulnerable individual drivers far more easily. But I think on top of that, so this is maybe a little bit historically heavy, but the taxi industry was born from negligence from the apartheid government. So the apartheid government didn't facilitate public transport for anyone who wasn't white or going into white areas, or it was heavily restricted, like trains and trams and buses. So the taxi industry developed as a necessity. The problem is in the 1980s, it was deregulated hectically, meaning that it could grow into these massive route-based associations. And it was literally the case of like multiple different operators coming together who were all like, we'll just band together and look after our own patch.
Yeah, turf.
Yeah, turf wars, yeah. Then in 94, it was one of the major things that the apartheid government recognized. The post-apartheid government recognized, the Mandela government recognized that we had this issue with this massive gray area business that in 2003 was estimated to transport 65% of
South African workers.
of South African commuters,
Okay.
and now it's 70%. So it's gone
Wow.
up since then. So they created something called the NTT. It was essentially a commission of an inquiry on how best to formalize the taxi industry, and they came up with a whole bunch of suggestions. One of them was to create a taxi owners union for collective bargaining, so the industry could speak to the government. So that was Santaco, and it got created as a result of the NTTT.
Okay.
Then they created Santawu, which was the workers' union. So that was, and it was part of COSATU, and it was created to represent the drivers.
Okay.
And then the third thing was something called the taxi recapitalization scheme, where they
Yeah.
bought back
That's how we got all the Toyotas
the
instead
Quantums.
of yes.
Instead of the CIRs.
Correct.
Yes. So there's always been, so the taxi industry has always been a gray area. It's always been half legal, half illegal.
Yes.
And there was
half regulated, half not. In
Exactly.
the law and out the law, yeah.
But totally crucial, always necessary. The problem is that because they were left to grow to such a point now, and I think of the taxi industry, and so I think of this whole situation with three main actors, right? There's the government, there's the taxi industry, and then the commuters.
Right.
And they all speak to each other, and they all have to interact with each other.
Although there's a technical, or like there's a significant distinction in one of them between the taxi bosses and the taxi drivers.
Yes,
but like maybe for this.
by the industry, I mean the owners. I don't
Right.
mean the drivers.
Right.
That's a separate thing. But the taxi associations, the bosses, the people in charge, have so much power that they can pick and choose what they agree with. So they agreed to Santaco, the formulation of Santaco, because they realized it would benefit themselves. They agreed to the buyback scheme to buy old taxis to get new taxis because it would help them.
Right.
But they did not install minimum wage contracts for their drivers, which they were asked to do. They didn't install cashless tap-to-go machines, which they were asked to do.
Wow.
Because that meant that there would be a paper trail that they could be taxed on, which they weren't.
They wanted contactless cash payments in 2003.
Yes,
That's
for tax
crazy.
reasons. It's a great idea. It's a great
Yeah.
idea. It's safer for commuters because they don't need to use cash. It's better for the government because it's paper trail, taxable. You don't, as a taxi driver, you don't have to carry around all that cash through the day and then get robbed and then you lose all your stuff. You lose all the accrued
So
capital.
interesting.
And it's there's such a long history of taxi associations picking and choosing what they comply with.
And then being too powerful to be disciplined.
The government can't do anything about it. And I would also just like to say that I am working on this project and doing research. I've spoken to a fair number of people who regularly take taxis and regularly commute. And the general consensus I've heard is go play hardball. So go in there with police, with the army, with guns, regulate the whole, like literally physically enforce the whole situation. But I just think that if that was the solution, it has been tried many times and it has not worked. You can't just use a big stick with the situation. It's too complicated and the taxi industry is too powerful. And ultimately, the real sad reality with the situation is the government and the taxi associations are fighting, negotiating, but the only people who actually face the consequences for those negotiations are the people using the taxis.
The only way to fundamentally change this never-changing, never-ending dynamic is for a set of politicians to take the personal hit and face down the taxi industry. The only way to change the dynamic is for basically a game of chicken where you're trying not to blink first. Because what would happen if the taxi industry really got faced down by security forces trying to pull it in line with the law is that there would be mass strikes, there would be shutdowns, there would be widespread disruption of people's lives, which would affect their ability to work and make money and buy food. So there'd have to be dramatic security protected interventions like providing food in communities, providing guarantees for income while strike action took place. And you'd basically have to face down an industry that has often resorted to violence and severe violence on a wide scale, like against entire train networks or bus routes. And those kind of pieces of infrastructure are so massive, it's really, really hard to protect them all. But you have to do it and take the hit if you're ever going to disempower the taxi industry to the point that other kinds of transport can thrive and the taxi industry can be regulated. And that requires politicians to really be brave enough to do that. And the vast majority of politicians don't feel like it. Like, why would you want to put yourself through that? You've only got a short term in office or a limited term in office. There's other stuff you could be doing. You've got your own political career to think about. You don't want to have to suddenly worry that there's like, in some cases, like threats on your life or threats on your family, or you don't want to have to worry about political consequences for your party because the taxi industry takes against your political party. It's a mess. But this dynamic will not change. It just will not change until there is a political disruption to the dynamic.